I woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. The sound ripped through the morning silence of the hotel room like a chainsaw. I fumbled for it, my head thick with a cheap whiskey hangover. The screen lit up. Andrew. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me dizzy. He was okay. I answered, my voice a dry croak. Andrew, man, where are you? Silence. Or not silence. Static. And underneath it, a sound. A ragged, desperate breath. In and out. In and out. As if he'd been running for miles. Andrew, I said again, louder this time, sitting bolt upright in bed. Then a whisper, so frayed and broken I could barely make it out. It was that woman. You got to get over here right now. Before I could form a single word, before I could ask where here was, I heard it. A sound like splintering wood. The unmistakable, violent crack of a door being smashed off its hinges. And then, the scream. It wasn't loud, but it was high and thin and utterly, horribly final. It was the sound of a life being torn apart. And then, the line went dead. Good evening, my lonely souls, and welcome. I'm Blair Morgan. What you just heard, that's the sound that ended a phone call. It's the beginning of a story that was shared with me this week. A story I haven't been able to get out of my head. The author, who we'll call Jesse, has given me his permission to share it with all of you tonight. But a sound like that doesn't come from nowhere. To understand the scream, you have to understand the drunken, foolish laughter that came right before it. It all started, as so many stories of regret do, with a celebration. A trip to Las Vegas for our friend Andrew's 21st birthday. There were 3 of us, me, my friend Eddie, and Andrew. Andrew was the quiet one. The shy one. The kind of guy who was brilliant and funny when you got him one-on-one, but in a crowd, he'd just fade into the wallpaper. He'd never had a girlfriend, never even been kissed as far as we knew. And we, in our infinite, drunken wisdom, decided this trip would be the one to change all that. Our mission, stated bluntly over cheap beers at the airport, was to get Andrew laid. We checked in to an off-strip hotel that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and desperation. We were young and broke, but in Vegas we felt like kings. We hit the casino floor, the world dissolving into a haze of neon lights and the constant, manic jackpot jingle of 1,000 slot machines. The whiskey flowed freely, and with every drink, our mission for Andrew felt more and more noble, more and more urgent. Later that night, we found ourselves in the pulsating heart of some cavernous nightclub. The bass vibrated in my bones, the air thick with sweat and perfume. Lights strobed across a sea of bodies, and everywhere I looked, people were connecting, laughing, disappearing into one another. Everywhere except for our corner. Andrew stood there, nursing the same drink for an hour, a polite, terrified smile frozen on his face. We tried, we really did. We'd point someone out, try to hype him up. Go talk to her, man. What's the worst that could happen? But he'd just shake his head, his eyes wide with a social anxiety so profound it was almost a physical force. He couldn't do it. The noise, the crowd, the expectations, it was his personal hell. And that's when the desperation, fueled by alcohol, curdled into a truly terrible idea. Eddie leaned over, his voice slurring in my ear. "This isn't working. We got to take matters into our own hands." We stumbled out of the club, away from the thumping music and into the cool desert night. The new plan was simple and in our minds foolproof. We would find a working girl for Andrew, a professional. No awkward small talk, no chance of rejection. It was a transaction. A way to help our friend cross a threshold we felt he desperately needed to cross. We didn't have to walk far. On a quieter side street, we saw her, a woman walking alone. She wasn't what you'd call a showstopper, nothing like the women in the club. She was plainly dressed, with long, dark hair. We approached her, a couple of drunk, giggling idiots on a misguided quest. Eddie did the talking. And then she turned her attention to Andrew, who was hanging back, looking at his shoes. That was the first red flag, the first note in the symphony of wrongness that was about to unfold. When she spoke, her voice was off. It wasn't a man's voice, not at all, but it had a strange timbre to it, a resonance that vibrated just a little too low, a note that was slightly out of tune with the rest of her appearance. "How much you got?" she asked, but her eyes weren't looking at the money in Eddie's hand. They were on Andrew. It wasn't a seductive look. It was analytical, cold, like a biologist studying a specimen. She scanned him from head to toe, and I saw a flicker of something in her gaze, not desire, but appraisal. Then she nodded once, a sharp, sudden movement, and grabbed Andrew's arm. He looked back at us, a nervous but excited smile on his face. He thought his friends had just done him the biggest favor of his life. We gave him a thumbs up, feeling proud of ourselves, and watched them walk off into the Vegas night. But our curiosity got the better of us. We decided to follow, just for a bit, to see where they went. We kept our distance, ducking behind palm trees and newsstands like spies in a bad movie. And that's when we saw the second red flag. They weren't talking. Not a single word exchanged between them. The street grew darker, quieter, lined with shuttered storefronts and peeling paint. And it didn't look like he was walking with her. It looked like she was pulling him. Her grip on his arm seemed tight, purposeful. Andrew's pace was hesitant, but she moved with a relentless forward momentum, dragging him further and further away from the glittering lights of the strip. We followed for what felt like 15 minutes, our drunken amusement slowly evaporating and being replaced by a vague sense of unease. They turned a corner and walked straight up to a dark, derelict-looking building. It didn't look like an apartment. It looked abandoned. She pulled him through the front door, and they were gone. We stood there for a moment in the silence. Eddie let out a nervous laugh. Well, guess he's in for an adventure. We laughed too, pushing down that little knot of wrongness in our stomachs. We told ourselves this was just how it worked. We slapped each other on the back, our mission a success, and headed back to the hotel, leaving our friend behind in the dark. We were so wrong. The next morning, Andrew's bed was empty, still neatly made. I figured he'd just gotten lucky and spent the night. But as the hours ticked by and the hangover began to fade, a cold concern started to creep in. He wasn't answering his calls. He wasn't responding to our texts. By noon, concern had blossomed into full-blown panic. And then, my phone rang. I've already told you what I heard. That ragged breathing, that broken whisper, that god-awful final scream. When the line went dead, I just sat there, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. Eddie was staring at me, his face pale. What was that? What did he say? I couldn't speak. I just replayed the call on speaker. We called the police. The operator was calm, professional, but I could barely form coherent sentences. I was trying to explain about the club, the woman, the abandoned building. Eddie, somehow, in his drunken state, had mentally mapped the route. He remembered the street names, the turns we'd made. We got in our car, the police on the phone, and guided them, our voices shaking, back to that dark, quiet street from the night before. We arrived to see 2 squad cars already there, their lights painting silent, flashing strokes of red and blue across the building's decaying facade. An officer met us on the sidewalk. He asked us to describe Andrew: height, weight, hair color, what he was wearing. We told him. He listened, his face an unreadable mask, then turned and spoke into his radio. A few minutes later, he walked back to us, and my blood ran cold at the words he said next. "Sir, we have a deceased individual inside. We need you to come and confirm if it's your friend." My entire world tilted on its axis. Deceased. The word didn't feel real. This couldn't be happening. This was a prank, a stupid birthday trip. It wasn't supposed to end like this. My legs felt like lead as I followed the officer into the building. It wasn't an apartment building. It was some kind of abandoned storage facility. The air was thick with the smell of dust and damp concrete. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the echoing silence. He led me down a long, dark hallway to an open storage closet. He shined his flashlight inside. "I'm sorry you have to see this," he said softly. And there he was, a body, slumped against the back wall, head tilted at an impossible angle. A wave of nausea and grief washed over me. It was over. We had failed him. We had led him to his death. I forced my eyes to focus, to take in the horrific reality, to look at my friend's face one last time. But it wasn't him. The boy in the closet had blonde hair. Andrew's hair was black. My entire world just collapsed. We found a body, but it wasn't him. The relief was instantly smothered by 1,000 new questions, 1,000 new horrors. If this wasn't Andrew, then who was it? And where, dear God, where was Andrew? At this point, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments, because we were losing our minds. The police had no leads. The woman had vanished. The dead boy in the closet remained a mystery. We flew home to New Jersey in a fog of guilt and terror. We tried to move on. We went back to our jobs, our lives, but there was a shadow over everything. Every time my phone rang with an unknown number, my heart would seize. Every time I saw a woman with long, dark hair, I would freeze. For a month, that terrified silence was the only thing we had, until the phone rang again. It was 3 a.m. I woke up to that same dreaded buzzing on my nightstand. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I had to. I swiped the screen. Hello? This time, there was no static, just a faint, impossibly weak voice. A voice I knew better than my own. Jessie. It was Andrew. Before I could even scream his name, I heard a slam in the background, like a heavy door being thrown shut, and the line went dead. I didn't hesitate. I called 911 immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I told them everything, the whole story, babbling like a madman. I told them my friend had just called me, that he was alive, and I begged them to trace the call. A detective called me back 10 minutes later. His voice was grim. Jessie, he said, we traced the call. It didn't come from a cell tower in Nevada. What? Where did it come from? There was a pause. It came from New Jersey. Your town. We've triangulated it to a vacant property on Elm Street, about a mile from your house. The horror was no longer 1,000 miles away in Vegas. It was here. It had followed us home. I didn't wait for the police. I threw on my clothes, grabbed a baseball bat from my garage, and sped toward the address. It was a normal-looking suburban house, just like mine, but dark, dead. I crept around the back and found a basement window slightly ajar. I slipped inside, my heart pounding. The house was empty, rooms filled with nothing but dust and shadows. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard a floorboard creak above me. I froze, and then I saw her. At the end of the upstairs hallway, a figure slipped out of a room. All I could see in the dim light were 2 pale, bare legs and a fall of long, black hair. She saw me at the same moment I saw her. She didn't scream. She didn't even pause. She just turned and fled down a back staircase and out a side door, disappearing into the night before I could even move. Seconds later, the house was flooded with flashing lights and shouting. The police swarmed in. They arrested a man they found in one of the back rooms. And upstairs, in the room the woman had just left, they found Andrew. He was locked in a closet. He was filthy, malnourished, and covered in bruises. But he was alive. Later, at the hospital, he told us everything. He'd been beaten, abused and starved. They had forced him, he sobbed, to give them our names, our hometowns, our addresses. The man they arrested wasn't talking, and the woman, she was gone, vanished. No one knew who she was or where she went. We thought, hoped, that was the end of it. But the real haunting was just beginning. About 2 weeks later, I got a text from a random number. It was just one word, you. I tried to reply, but the number was already blocked, disconnected. A cold dread, a feeling I was now intimately familiar with, settled in my gut. Then, last night, it happened. I was in my room. The house was quiet. The only sounds were the familiar creaks and groans of a house settling. I was about to turn off my lamp when a light flickered on in my backyard. I went completely still. A shadow moved past my window. I crept to the blinds, my breath held tight in my chest. I peered through a tiny sliver, and I saw a figure standing at the edge of my lawn, near the trees, just standing there, perfectly still. The security light cast them in a pale, sickly glow. I saw long, dark hair, and I saw a face turn slowly to look right at my window, as if they knew I was there, as if they were waiting for me to look. I'm certain it was her. A jolt of pure ice water flooded my veins, and every muscle in my body locked up. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stared, locked in that gaze, until the figure simply turned and melted back into the darkness of the trees. By the time I fumbled for my phone, they were gone. That was the last he saw of her. But the story doesn't feel over, does it? He says he's always waiting, always listening, and so are we. If these stories, these shared whispers in the dark, mean something to you, the best way you can support our little community is to subscribe and perhaps leave a like. It ensures we can keep the light on for all the other lonely souls out there. And as you know, stories like this are fragile. They can be silenced at any moment. So, if this one resonated with you, save it, share it, before it disappears into the static forever.